In today's video, we will sketch this window using my new set of dip pens. I apologize that I didn't realize that the battery on my camera had gone flat, so we've missed out the beginning part of the sketch. So we're coming in with the first window shutter already sketched and the outline of the window already done. I'm using the number 2 dip pen from the previous video. This is the slightly wider of the 2 thinner pens. It's still got a bit of a variance in the line width that it's able to do, but it's not too thick. And I'm using permanent ink. I'm being very conscious of trying to keep a slightly wobbly hand when I'm drawing my lines, so that this isn't a perfectly straight architectural rendition, but rather that it's going to have a little bit of character. Be aware when you are working with dip pens that the ink can take quite a lot longer to dry on the page than if you were working with a fountain pen, so work around carefully so that your hand doesn't smudge the ink that you've already laid down. To maintain the softness of the curtains, I'm going to draw staggered lines that are not full length, just to maintain the softness of the curtain. And then I'm just going to fill in any of the bolts and latches that I can see in the sketch. For the shadow section of the sketch, I will now move to the wider pointed number 3 nib dip pen. Finding these areas of shadow will just give more contrast and more interest to the sketch. So I'm going to start by working around the inside of the window frame, highlighting the areas of shadow that I can see there, and then under the shutters. As I put in the shadows on the louvered sections of the windows, I will do the horizontal shadows as well as the shadows on the side, because that is what will indicate that the panels are angled away from us. Although there isn't really such a defined shadow around this windowsill in the photograph, I want to make it appear as though the sun is coming from the top right corner of the picture, and so that's why I put the shadow on the bottom and the left of the windowsill. And then I'm just going to repeat everything on the right hand shutter that I did on the left, with the same shadows between the panels and on the left and right hand sides. And now I will just go around each of the window panes, indicating the cast shadow of the window pane onto the curtains. I find that the ink from the dip pens takes considerably longer to dry than something like the micron fineliner pens, so make sure to leave it for long enough to dry completely. Okay, so I'm ready to paint. Today I'm going to use my silver black velvet sized 8 brush. I'm just going to spray the paints to activate them. I rewatched this video and I'm preparing the green color to put on the shutters. I'm very aware of the big mishap that is about to occur when I put the paint color down. It is such a big mistake that occurs that I wasn't even sure if I should produce this video, but I thought it would be a good opportunity to have a look at how to troubleshoot potential problems that might arise. So here we go. I'm putting the green color on, and as you can see, the entire thing just smudges. I'm convinced that I used permanent ink to put this image down. Nonetheless, as soon as I put the green down, the entire thing just smudges into one big blur. At this point, I'm just in a complete state of shock, and I'm not entirely sure how to even proceed or whether to proceed at all. So I'm going to dab it dry with some tissue paper, maybe that'll lift some of the ink, and then I'm just going to lay down the green again. At this point, I'm not even sure if I'm going to complete the sketch, but whilst I think about what my next step is going to be, I just do the same on the right shutter as I did on the left. That is, lay down some green color, dab it with some tissue paper, and then try and put a bit more green in, and avoiding the ink lines as much as I can. It is at this point that I decide that I'm going to finish this off and use it as a learning opportunity for myself, and that also at the end of it all I need to try and establish what it is that went wrong. Did I use the wrong ink? what caused this big mishap to occur. That I will have a look at a little bit later. So I've mixed up some grey titanium and I'm going to go around the edge of the window with that, trying wherever I can to not touch the ink, but sometimes it's just simply unavoidable. Now I'm going to add some Naples yellow to the grey titanium and do the inner windowsill with that colour. Now I want to indicate the folds in the curtains, so I'm going to mix up a very weak solution of Payne's Grey and just put in some shadow lines down the curtains. Now I'm just going to drop some green in around the edge of the shutters, and I will add some thicker consistency of the grey mix to the inner wall of the windowsill. For the wooden window frame, I'm going to use some transparent brown oxide. And now I will just drop in some grey wherever there are the bolts and latches. Whilst this first layer is drying, I thought that I would try and do some troubleshooting as to what went wrong. So over here I've got a sample of both the non-permanent and the permanent inks that I've got in the two different bottles. I'm pretty sure I used the permanent in my sketch, but I want to double check. So I've let the sample lines dry and I'm going over each of the lines with a wet brush. And as expected, the lines are running with the non-permanent ink, but when I come to the permanent ink here, I can see that although it is running less, it still is running. I have used this exact ink in other sketches before, so I just can't explain at the moment why the permanent is running. The paint on the first layer of the window has dried, so I'm now going to go in with a second layer with the same colors I used previously. I'm just going to try and lift some of the grayness and get a bit more color into the sketch. So in the darkest areas of each color, I'm just going to try and lay down a little bit more, preserving the lightest parts of each section that I can, just so that there is a little bit of contrast in the painting. As I'm laying down the paint in the second layer, my thoughts go again to trying to explain the reason for the smudging of the ink. And by process of elimination, my next thought has to go to the paper that I'm using. Because I was just going to use my dip pens and test them out and then also just do a simple sketch, I decided today to use a cheaper cellulose paper. I think with that being the only real point of difference that remains, that is going to be something I'm going to have to test in a little while. In the meantime, I'm just finishing up these shutters, trying to stay away from the ink lines as much as I can, and I'm just trying to get some differences in green tones on the shutters. With the curtains, I'm just going to try and do one or two areas where there is slightly darker tone, just so that I've got more than one tone of grey in the curtains. And then I'm going to put some shadow area around the inside of the windowsill, just to push the window pane back a little bit. And then I'm going to add some shadow on the bottom ledge of the windowsill. Then I'm going to do another pass over the curtains just to put in one or two darker areas. And then I'm going to include some cast shadows on the wall. I'm considering that the light is coming from the top right, so I'm going to put shadow on the bottom as well as on the left of the shutter and the windowsill, and also the bolts on the window. The last thing I'm going to do to try and diagnose the problem with my pens is to try a different paper. So this is 100% cotton paper. I've used the permanent ink dip pen, allowed it to dry completely, and now I'm passing over it with clean water. And as you can see, it is not running at all. So my conclusion therefore is that the cellulose paper that I was using for my sample is the thing that was causing the ink to run, and not the ink itself. Anyway, I've done the best I can with the bad situation that I found myself in, and I just know that for the future I will use 100% cotton paper for my dip pen sketches. Until next time, bye for now.